He's as precious as apple pie. Those were the words my mother-in-law Nancy used when she saw my newborn son. She showered him with such adoration. It was clear she truly loved him. She willingly took care of him when I was at work. But at the time, I didn't notice it. The love she lavished on my son was a bit too much. My name is Emily. I'm 28 years old and working full-time. I married my husband Liam a year ago, and soon after we started living with his parents. Before moving in, I was a little anxious, but my relationship with my mother-in-law was, I believe, reasonably good. She even helped us with household chores, since my husband and I are both busy with work. But if there was one thing that bothered me, it was the daily questions about our plans to have a child. It's been a year since you got married. Aren't you planning to have children yet? I think it's about time you started. You're not getting any younger. Don't you think you should be more mindful of that? Day in, day out, the topic of having kids would come up. Perhaps my mother-in-law meant no harm, but for me, it was becoming a source of stress. It's not like I didn't want kids. But I was also working, and we had financial considerations to think about. My mother-in-law says it's been a year, but from my perspective, we had just been married for a year. I wanted to continue working, and if we were to have children, I wanted a bit more financial security. So having kids right after getting married was not in my plans. I knew my mother-in-law was looking forward to a grandchild from the start of our marriage. But her constant demands, disregarding our situation, were becoming a problem. Feeling worn out from the constant pressure, one night after my mother-in-law went to bed, I decided to discuss it lightly with my husband. She keeps bringing up the topic of kids. What do you think? The daily remarks are putting a lot of pressure on me. I was honest with him about how stressful it was to be constantly asked about grandchildren, without any consideration of our situation.
Well, Mom was really looking forward to a grandchild, but I didn't realize she was pressing you this much. I'm sorry.
My husband seemed surprised. He hadn't thought his mother would be so persistent. He promised to talk to her about it. Then my husband made a suggestion.
Not because Mom is pushing us, but shouldn't we start thinking about having a kid? You know, I've got a promotion coming up, and it looks like my salary will increase,
Liam revealed.
So we'll have a bit more room in our budget, and I think it might be less risky to have a child while you're still young, Emily.
He wasn't forcing the issue, but he wanted to add this to the mix. He hoped I would consider it. Well, if your salary is going to increase, that might be a good idea. Okay, I'll think about it. But for now, please talk to Nancy about easing up. I requested some time to consider, and emphasized to Liam that while I was open to having a child, I needed his mom to stop pressuring us. A few days later, Liam did talk to his mom, and thankfully, her constant prodding stopped. After that, the topic of kids never came up in direct conversations, and before I knew it, I was feeling less stressed. Once things settled down, I found myself more open to the idea of having a child. Just like Liam suggested. About that baby, I think we should move forward with what we talked about. Considering our age and health, sooner might be better, I told him. So we decided to wait for his promotion to be confirmed, and then we would start trying for a baby. Half a year later, everything fell into place, and I found out I was pregnant. We were happy, but nobody was more thrilled than Nancy. She had been waiting for this moment to become a grandmother. Every day, she was restless with anticipation, always checking up on me, which was quite endearing. Although I didn't appreciate her rushing us, I knew it was because she wanted a grandchild so badly. Gradually, I found myself able to interact with her in a more relaxed manner. A few months later, The day of my delivery arrived. Despite my many fears and worries, with the support of my husband and Nancy, I successfully gave birth to a healthy baby boy. We named him Jackson. The joy I felt holding our little son was immeasurable. After the delivery, I went on parental leave and dedicated my time to taking care of our newborn. As a first-time mom, I was groping my way through child rearing, and it was a lot harder than I had anticipated. Nevertheless, the joy of having Jackson far outweighed the hardships, and I cherished every moment I spent with him. Time flew by quickly, and before I knew it, Jackson was nearly a year old, and my parental leave was about to end. I decided to return to work as planned, but then we hit a snag. We couldn't find a child care center. I knew there was a shortage, but I didn't expect it to be this difficult. Liam and I were left scratching our heads. Eventually, I decided to extend my parental leave. During that time, Jackson kept growing, and by the time he was almost 2, I decided to return to work. We still couldn't find a child care center, but Nancy offered to take care of Jackson. "You don't want to quit your job, do you, Emily? I'm always home anyway, so please don't hesitate to leave him with me," she said. "I'll just be bored if I'm alone." Her offer was a godsend. With our son turning 2, my husband and I had been planning to enroll him in preschool when he hit 3. There seemed to be enough openings at nearby kindergarten, and we thought we could somehow manage for another year. For the past 2 years, we'd been sharing childcare responsibilities with my mother-in-law. She was someone we felt we could trust to care for our son. Thanks to her, I was able to make a successful return to work. So I started working again. Everything was going smoothly at work, and our life was complaint-free. A year after we started this lifestyle, as our son was about to turn 3, I noticed something odd about him. He used to be thrilled when I came home, but now he seemed distant. He was always around my mother-in-law, not wanting to get close to me. I thought maybe he'd become too attached to my mother-in-law because she was looking after him. But I was also doing my best to communicate with him. I wondered what could have possibly happened. Then, something even more worrying occurred. Our son had stopped speaking almost entirely. As he grew older, he became quite the chatterbox, to the point where it was almost too much. Now, it was as if he was a completely different person, not speaking at all. Could it be because I've been working and he's feeling lonely? Or is there something wrong with him? My husband had also noticed that something was off about our son. We decided to take him to the hospital, but my mother-in-law vehemently opposed this. "A hospital? Why? Jackson is fine. He's a really good boy. I'm the one looking after him, so trust me, don't label this child as sick." She was absolutely frantic in her opposition. This made me suspicious. A woman as overprotective as her should be rushing to the hospital if she thought something was wrong with our son. Yet she was actively opposing us taking him? I had always trusted her with our son, but this made me distrustful. My husband also felt there was something off about my mother-in-law and brought it up one night after she'd gone to bed. "Do you really think there's nothing wrong with Jackson? Mom was so adamant that he's fine." "I think we should get him checked out." I agreed with my husband. Our once talkative son had become entirely subdued. No matter how much my mother-in-law assured us he was fine, we couldn't just let it be. We decided on the spot to take him to the hospital immediately. A few days later, my husband took time off work to match my schedule, and we took our son to the hospital. My mother-in-law seemed unhappy about this until the end. "I told you he's fine. This is a wild goose chase." She was still angry as we left the house. She initially wanted to come along, but my husband told her it was best if just the two of us took him, which might have upset her. Ignoring my mother-in-law's irritation, we headed to the hospital with our son. Our son was our main concern, not my mother-in-law. Throughout our journey to the hospital, our son remained silent. My husband and I attempted to lighten the mood, to break his silence, but it was in vain. Could something be wrong with him? We exchanged worried glances. Upon arrival at the hospital, our son went through a series of tests. My husband and I stood by anxiously, awaiting the doctor's diagnosis. We were prepared to accept any result calmly, but the doctor's diagnosis was something we hadn't expected. Despite the multitude of tests, the doctor stated that there was no physical abnormality in our son. A sense of relief washed over us, but it left us puzzled. Why had our son changed so drastically? To our queries, the doctor suggested,
"It might be something psychological."
What could he mean by psychological? On our way home from the hospital, my husband and I discussed various possibilities. Still, we arrived home without any clear answers. As soon as we entered the house, my mother-in-law, as if lying in wait, asked us about the test results. When we told her that there were no physical issues, she responded with a triumphant, "See, I told you so." We deliberately kept quiet about the psychological aspect, knowing that she would likely create a fuss over it. From then on, my husband and I paid more attention to our son than ever before. I made a point of coming home from work as early as possible to spend more time with him. My husband did the same, trying to converse with our son more, even sharing a bath with him, ensuring he established solid communication. Gradually, changes started to appear in our son. He still didn't talk much, but he began to approach me with a smile, just like before. My husband and I reflected on our behavior, thinking that we might have made him feel lonely. I even started contemplating quitting my job. Then one day, after finishing work, I came home to find our son waiting to greet me. Such an occurrence had become rare, and it filled me with joy. As I patted his head and told him to wait in the living room while I changed, my mother-in-law emerged from the living room. Just as I was heading towards the bedroom to change, she stopped me, saying that she had something to discuss about our son. "Recently, Jackson has been showing a defiant attitude towards me. Did you say anything to him?" She asked calmly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes, which struck a sense of fear in me. Defiant? I don't see it that way, and I haven't said anything. Upon hearing my response, my mother-in-law glared at me and began to yell. "Lately, he has been ignoring what I say. It's absurd for him to rebel against me when I'm the one taking care of him. He's being strange, rebelling against me who has been treating him so well." My mother-in-law, who had insisted that nothing was wrong with our son when we tried to take him to the hospital, she is now calling him abnormal. Her words intensified my mistrust towards her. Until now, I left my son in her care, reassured by her apparent affection for him. But I began to question if that was a mistake. However, I saw no strange behavior from her while we were at home together. But the unsettling feeling I had about my mother-in-law just wouldn't go away. I decided to find out the truth for myself. After having a chat with her, I pulled out an old voice recorder I had used for work and secretly set it up in the living room the following morning. I didn't feel great about spying on my family, and I thought my husband might oppose if I told him about this, so I kept it a secret. Obviously, since the goal was to monitor my mother-in-law, I didn't let her in on the plan either. The next day, after I got home from work, I retrieved the recorder from the living room and played back the recording in our bedroom. What I heard was outrageous. It was my mother-in-law saying the unthinkable. My hand was shaking from shock, and I felt a surge of anger. I was mad at my mother-in-law and at myself for not noticing this before. I collected myself, then contacted my husband. I asked him to come home as soon as he could. I was thinking about leaving the house with our son. I apologized for recording without permission. I attached a message and sent him the audio file I had retrieved from the recorder. Then I quickly returned to the living room, picked up my son, and took him to the bedroom. My mother-in-law looked slightly annoyed, but she didn't say anything. As I put my son to sleep in the bedroom, I waited for my husband to come home. Watching my son's peaceful sleeping face, I heard my husband returning home. Then, I heard him yelling from the living room.
"Hey, Mom, what's the meaning of this?"
He must have rushed back home. My husband was panting. I hurried to the living room as quietly as possible so as not to wake my son.
"What do you mean? What's going on?"
There was my mother-in-law, stunned by my husband's uncharacteristic rage. I tried to calm my husband down. "Jackson is sleeping." At my words, my husband seemed to come back to his senses. He took a deep breath and motioned for my mother-in-law to sit in front of us.
Wait, what? What's happening?"
I placed the recorder in front of my clueless mother-in-law. Then I explained why my husband and I were upset. "I'm sorry, but we recorded you while you were alone with Jackson. Can you explain this to us?" I said, and played the stored audio. The numerous words that my mother-in-law had presumably spoken to my son filled the room. It was painful to hear them again. But my husband and I silently endured it and let her listen.
"When will you understand I am your mom? You should call me Mom, okay? That woman is not your mom, so don't get along with her even when she comes back. You've been clinging to that woman lately, and you've even welcomed her home yesterday, but you don't have to do that."
To my shock, my mother-in-law was demanding our son to call her Mama. Even when I, his actual mother, returned home, she insisted that he shouldn't get close to me. I was stunned into silence when I first heard about it. It also made sense why our son had been acting odd.
"That woman she's referring to is Emily, right? What on earth does she mean by teaching him Emily isn't his mother?"
My husband calmly yet angrily confronted his mother. Rehearing the recording, I realized how unsettling it was. "No, you got it all wrong. This is just a game. I'm just trying to make things fun for him." A pathetic excuse spilled from my mother-in-law's mouth. What kind of game was this supposed to be? To think she would act normal around us but fill our son's head with such nonsense behind our backs. You claimed that our son was abnormal. But isn't the abnormal one here you? All our son did was not act according to her whims, and that's why she labeled him as abnormal. There's nothing strange about a child wanting to be with his mother. But my mother-in-law couldn't stand it.
"A game, huh? Do you really think such an excuse would work? Explain yourself."
My normally mild-mannered husband, for the first time, interrogated his mother with a stern look. Caught in a bad position, my mother-in-law fell silent. No matter what we said, she kept her head down without responding. Finally, my husband, losing his patience, slammed the table and declared,
"We cannot allow someone who does such bizarre things to be near our precious son. We're leaving this house."
Upon hearing that, my mother-in-law, who had been looking down, quickly raised her head. "Huh? Leave? What do you mean? What are you saying? I absolutely hate this idea. It's going to be troublesome. I apologize. Please forgive me." She must have realized what it meant for us to leave. The previously silent mother-in-law suddenly began to apologize. If we left, not only would she lose her grandson she longed for, her life would also become difficult. We had been taking care of most of her living expenses. I felt deep contempt for her when she raised her voice the moment she realized her future living conditions were in jeopardy. Do you think a mere apology can solve this? Do you know how our 3-year-old son felt? Thinking about our son, I couldn't hold back my tears. My husband seemed to feel the same. His eyes red. He threw an even colder gaze at his mother.
We're leaving, whether you're troubled or not. As far as we're concerned, you're no longer family.
With that, he grabbed my hand and headed for our room. We began to pack, picked up our sleeping son, and left the house. The moment we left, my husband apologized to me for his mother's behavior, but I couldn't bring myself to blame her alone. We are also responsible for not noticing it earlier and leaving him with her. Hearing that, my husband murmured in agreement. But severing ties with my mother-in-law was a decision my husband and I made. It was undeniable that our current situation was having a negative impact on our son. That's why we, as parents, must improve it. As we discussed this, we hailed a cab and headed for my parents. I had contacted them before confronting my mother-in-law, so both my dad and mom warmly welcomed us. There, my husband apologized to our son about his grandmother and patiently listened to his side of the story. However, as expected, our son didn't say a word.
He might be hurt deep down. Let's give him some time until he's ready to talk.
We decided to prioritize keeping him as calm as possible for now, while also considering counseling for him.
Jackson, I'm sorry. From now on, it's just going to be the 3 of us. Mom, Dad, and you. You don't have to worry about anything anymore.
My husband gently patted our son's head as he said this. Then, in a feeble voice, our son said, "I don't like Grandma." "Jackson, can you talk?" Surprised, I raised my voice. Both my husband and I, holding back tears, waited for our son to say more. Once we told him he would no longer be living with his grandmother, he slowly began to share everything. The fear of her rage if he didn't treat her as his mother, which made him unable to say a word. Being told that I was a wicked demon and that he should stay away from me. And the confusion he felt because he loved both me and his father and didn't know what to do. In his own halting words, he spoke slowly. I deeply regretted ever trusting my mother-in-law and focusing solely on my work. My husband and I continued to apologize to our son, telling him that from now on, it would be just us 3 always together. We tried our hardest to convey to him how much both of us loved him. Since then, until we found our next home, we lived at my parents' house. Thanks to my mother-in-law's absence, our son started regaining his cheerful self, even speaking with me normally again. Every day, I am sincerely glad to see his smile back. My husband gets daily messages from his mother, begging him to come back home, but he never responds. I used a blocking feature to avoid getting any messages from her. Just the other day, my husband went alone to his parents' house to retrieve our belongings. He apparently completely ignored his mother even then. He told me she was crying loudly, like a child.
Even seeing my mother in that state, I felt no sympathy. The only family I need to protect now is Emily and Jackson. I can't tolerate anyone hurting them, even if it's their own grandparents.
That's what he said while talking about his mother. I'm deeply grateful to my husband for taking immediate action to protect our son. I truly feel that being able to live with my precious family is the greatest happiness. I do feel a little sorry for my mother-in-law, who lost that. Eventually, my husband cut off all contact with his mother, and we moved to a new home. We've arranged to hear from a relative if anything happens to his mother. According to this relative, she's completely deflated, and she seems to be getting more and more depressed every day. She doesn't seem to have much room in her life, and apparently she spends her days crying alone in her large house without ever going out. On the other hand, we moved to a secure condominium and started our new life. I quit my job to spend more time with my son, and together with my husband, we're doing our best to take care of his mental health. Thanks to that, our son seems to be back to his energetic self. Sometimes he can be a handful, but even that I find endearing. I want to continue watching over my husband and son to ensure that our son never has to go through anything tough again, because that is our greatest happiness.
I'm Karen. I'm 33 years old. We're a family of 3, my husband William, who's the same age, and our 3-year-old daughter, Evelyn. My husband's family runs a tutoring center. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law used to be teachers, and my husband also has a teaching license. They are affluent and well-educated, and I sometimes find it hard to believe that I'm part of such a family. At first, my parents and friends were worried about me, but there was nothing to worry about. They're really good people. Even though I was the athlete type, in contrast, my in-laws welcomed me with open arms. My mother-in-law was thrilled to have a daughter. Although I was nervous at first, my strength lies in my cheerful and lively character. I decided to be myself, and we built a relationship from there. I hold a certified arborist certification, and I do health assessments on trees, pruning, planting, and relocation, as well as consulting. I studied hard to get my certification, and even after getting out into the field, it's a physically demanding job. Not only do you need brains, but it's a job that really requires physical work. I always take care of my health, and I'm quite strong for a woman. Right now, my husband is a tutor in the family-run tutoring center, but he used to be an elementary school teacher. The first time I met him was when I visited the school he worked at for a meeting about the health and care of the trees. After giving birth, I took parental leave and just returned to work last year. Since our daughter is still young, I prioritize my family thanks to the understanding of my workplace. But there are times when I just can't make it in time to pick her up. When that happens, my mother-in-law helps out, and my husband will pick up our daughter if he can. I appreciated the support from my work, and I was living a fulfilling life. However, there was one person in my married life who troubled me. It was my sister-in-law. She's the wife of my husband's brother. My husband has 2 brothers, and my husband is the second oldest. The youngest son is still single. The eldest son, Richard's wife, is Sarah, and she's the source of my problems. She's basically a housewife, but she also helps with the accounting and administrative work of the tutoring center. They have a 5-year-old boy, and they seem to be planning to have him take an entrance exam for a private elementary school. From the first time I met Sarah at the in-laws' house, I knew she was a different kind of person. She was petite, always well-dressed, and her hair was neat, and I thought she was wonderful when I saw her smiling. But she had 2 faces. It was when we were in the kitchen helping my mother-in-law, and she left for a moment. "Hey, can't you do something about your appearance?" Huh? Sarah, who had been smiling, had a voice that was so different. I thought she was a different person. "You're always wearing clothes that look worn out and dirty. Don't you realize you're the only one who sticks out here?" I'm embarrassed. Well, I find these clothes easy to move in, and I have to chase after my daughter all the time because she's still little." "I have a child too, you know." Sarah sighed dramatically and seemed to have more to say, but she returned to her usual demeanor when she saw my mother-in-law returning. "Oh, what were you 2 talking about?" "Oh, we were just talking about child-rearing." It's amazing how she can change her voice in an instant. I wonder if she has a sensor that automatically switches when my mother-in-law comes. My mother-in-law looked at me as if to say, "Is that so?" "Yes, we were talking about our kids." Upon hearing this, Sarah seemed satisfied. I'm not afraid of skinny Sarah, but it's not like I can't shrug off this level of sarcasm, and I didn't want to worry my mother-in-law unnecessarily. I've got a few friends dealing with issues with their mother-in-laws and sister-in-laws. It's not unusual, after all, to hear about stress due to the mother-in-law factor. Given this context, my mother-in-law is like a saint, always rooting and supporting my career. I thought I could deflect my sister-in-law's snide comments easily. However, every time we crossed paths, she would continue to demean me. Once, while on a work errand, I bumped into my sister-in-law, Sarah, who was chatting with a couple of her mom friends. We locked eyes, and not wanting to be rude, I greeted her. "Hello, Sarah." "Oh, hi there." I was in a rush and moved on after the brief exchange, but later that night she called my home. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" She snapped at me, her tone extremely aggressive from the get-go. "Huh? What do you mean?" "Earlier today, don't you dare approach me in public dressed like that. What's with your work outfit? I can't believe you would walk around outside looking like that. Did you see us? It's only proper to look presentable, even if you have nothing special going on. We're all mom friends who are preparing our kids for private school entrance exams. We live in a different world from you." Oh, I was so embarrassed. She launched into a tirade without pause. "Well, I was working, so I was indeed in my work clothes," I replied. "I don't care about that. Just don't approach me anymore when we meet outside, okay? It's embarrassing." "But isn't that even stranger? We're family after all." "That's what I've been trying to tell you, haven't I? You're just not fitting for the family. Just so you know, I've never considered you a sister-in-law." She hung up abruptly, leaving me stunned. She really went out of her way to call and vent her feelings. Although she consistently complained about me at family gatherings, what's worse is that she only reveals her true colors when we're alone. She prides herself in being a fashionable, high-class woman from a wealthy family. It's fine if she enjoys that. What I don't understand is her constant need to attack me, simply because I don't align with her preferences. Yes, she always dresses elegantly in sports accessories, but why does she need so many? I wonder if her quiet husband, my brother-in-law, lets her shop as much as she wants. He probably doesn't even know about this side of her. It's just who she is. I've kept silent about this to my brother-in-law and mother-in-law, but I did let my husband in on it, as it was becoming a source of stress. "Huh? She doesn't seem like that." He initially shrugged it off. A few days later, my mother-in-law called me. There was a family dinner coming up over the weekend, and she wanted to let me know the time and place. We each live about 30 minutes away by car. Normally, she doesn't interfere with her son's household. However, she insists on gathering the entire family for my father-in-law's birthday, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. This time, it was because my father-in-law's birthday was approaching. This time, we managed to reserve a private room at his favorite steakhouse. It's our first time going there as a family, but it's really good. I hope you're looking forward to it. "Oh, I am, thank you." While I was genuinely excited, I dreaded seeing my sister-in-law again. "You don't sound very enthusiastic. Are you busy at work?" "Oh, I'm okay. I'm perfectly fine." Uh-oh, had my voice betrayed my feelings? I hurriedly reassured her. "Karen, if there's anything bothering you at home, please let me know, okay?" Our home? We're managing just fine, even when work runs late. You help us out. I really appreciate all you do for us." "It's not about your family, though." "Huh?" I was puzzled, not understanding what she meant. Then the weekend came, and with it, the dinner party. It was my father-in-law's birthday celebration, a chance to express our gratitude for my father-in-law and mother-in-law. I resolved to celebrate wholeheartedly, and not to let my spiteful sister-in-law get to me. I left home early, and when I walked into the private room at the restaurant, I sighed with relief as my father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law had not yet arrived. I'd come early as to not keep my father-in-law waiting on his birthday celebration, and also because the less time I spent with Sarah, the better. However, my brother-in-law and Sarah showed up right after I did. "Hello."
"Hi, Karen."
"Richard, it's nice to see you." After we exchanged greetings, my husband and brother-in-law started talking. Sarah, on the other hand, swiftly came over to me and looked me up and down before sighing. "What are you wearing? For such an upscale restaurant, you could at least dress a bit nicer. How many times do I have to tell you?" The demeaning comments started as usual, only in a lower tone. Is this really the time or place for that? I clenched my teeth and forced a smile. I chose this dress thinking about the occasion. Is it inappropriate? I mean, it's not from a high-end brand or anything. It's quite surprising you could show up in such a cheap outfit. You, despite being a woman, have such broad shoulders that the dress doesn't suit you. And your accessories? Just a wedding ring? You never wear nail polish either, and your hands look rough. I can't wear nail polish for my job. Isn't it inconvenient to do household chores with such long nails, Sarah? My job involves working with wood and soil in addition to household chores, so my hands tend to get rough. Not being able to wear nail polish was not something I was concerned about. Compared to the average woman, my masculinity is a testament to my hard work as a gardener. These hands, these shoulders, they are my pride, yet she belittles them and I couldn't help but retort. What did you say? Are you suggesting that I don't do housework? Perhaps my rebuttal did sit well with her. Sarah's voice grew louder. I really can't stand you. I've been trying to help you out of kindness, but you never listen, and now you're resisting? It's unbearable to be lumped in with a rough woman like you. I messed up. My sister-in-law seemed to be losing sight of her surroundings in her anger. This is my father-in-law's celebration today. Please don't bother me. Huh? You're the one ruining everything. You're the one who doesn't belong in this family. I told you, I can't dine with someone as shabby as you. Go home. Wait, what? I have to go home? This dinner was organized by my mother-in-law, and the person ruining it is clearly her. I'll listen to your complaints about me later. I have things to say to you as well, but for now... I had decided to stand my ground, but not now. Don't you dare talk back to me. Didn't you hear me? I said go home. In fact, leave this family. Just as my husband started to approach in response to Sarah's loud voice, the private room's door opened. The one leaving should be you. My mother-in-law entered the room, quietly yet decisively. My father-in-law and their youngest son, John, also entered, and my mother-in-law gently closed the door. What? Sarah, who was fired up, must have remembered where she was and what was happening. She was lost for words, her mouth opening and closing in surprise. What was that about? Everyone, please sit down. Despite her soft voice, there was a compelling force in my mother-in-law that everyone obeyed. It seems we need to have a chat before we can enjoy the birthday celebration. I'm sorry for this interruption. Seeing my father-in-law nod in agreement, my mother-in-law turned back to Sarah. Sarah, what did you say to Karen? Whoa, even my kind-hearted mother-in-law could dish out a strong sarcasm when needed. Sarah, flustered, answered, Oh, just saying I'm looking forward to today's meal. Did I hear wrong? I thought I heard get out. Huh? No, that was a small argument. It was just a joke. She was still somewhat agitated, but I was impressed at how Sarah was trying to regain her usual cheerful demeanor. An argument? What caused it? It seemed you were the one doing all the talking. Have you been bullying Karen like this whole time? She probably heard everything from the door, staring straight at Sarah. I didn't bully her. I was just offering advice on manners and dress as a senior member of this household. That didn't seem like advice, and everyone should be free to wear what they want as long as it's respectful. She wasn't dressed oddly. But wearing non-branded clothes in such a high-end restaurant, her makeup and accessories were minimal. I thought she shouldn't embarrass you and the rest. Enough! My mother-in-law's outburst made me jump, along with Sarah. The three brothers and my father-in-law knew that my mother-in-law was scary when angry. They seemed unfazed by the situation, showing picture books and speaking to the children to distract them. No. Sarah, you're the one who should be embarrassed. I had noticed that something was off about you two, even during gatherings at our house. I initially thought you were having friendly chats. Huh? Friendly? Yes, friendly chats, right? Sarah gave me a desperate look that was completely different from before, but I avoided meeting her gaze. For the record, Karen never snitched on you. You wasted her kindness, hoping you would eventually change. Your attitude only escalated. Well, that's... Stammering, Sarah was met with my mother-in-law's even harsher tone. And you always wear beautiful clothes and have so many purses. Yes, that's true. I always make sure to look presentable wherever I go. Where does the money for that come from? Huh? Just as she thought she could regain the upper hand, an unexpected question made Sarah freeze. That is, of course, from my... We're paying you for helping with the tuition and accounting at the tutoring school. Even if my son said you could use that money freely, it doesn't seem like it would be enough. Your clothes and purses are all designer brands. Oh, well, because... Are you exploiting the fact that you're in charge of the household finances to satisfy your own desires? What do you mean? She stammered. I could see why she's confused. I was curious about the source of their money myself. I had always thought my brother-in-law was just a generous guy. Maybe he just left all the household finances to her. It's concerning to me that he didn't keep a closer eye on their spending. Maybe he trusted her because she acted as a good wife so well. When I think about it like that, I almost feel sorry for him. So, you've been spending money like water, and now you want to send your child to a private school? She asked. You've been settling aside funds for their education, right? What? You're not expecting us to pay, are you? No, not at all, but he's your adorable grandchild after all. Which is it? So she was planning to rely on my father-in-law and mother-in-law's money all along. Of course we love our grandchildren. We're thinking of supporting them financially if necessary, says my mother-in-law. Really? But only after you leave our home. What? No, there's no need for that. I'll apologize to Karen for telling her to leave. Karen? It's the first time she's referred to me by name. You will forgive me, right? We're sisters after all. Sisters? Only while you're married to my brother-in-law. My mother-in-law looks at me as if to sign that I should continue. Even if it's official, I don't want to become family. I don't think of you as a sister. Caught off guard, Sarah let out a weird noise. And that's not all. You've also been dipping into the money from the tutoring school. Sarah was speechless, her eyes wide in shock. Is that true? I was genuinely surprised by my mother-in-law's words. I had expected Sarah to use the household money freely, but I didn't think she would touch the funds from the tutoring school my in-laws run. You were clever enough to not get caught, so it took us a while to figure it out. Even Bob, who's been in charge of our accounts for years, was manipulated by you. Sarah's face turned pale. You were buying gifts like gift baskets for the suppliers of our teaching materials, expressing gratitude to teachers holding seminars, all this shopping under your charge. The amount on the receipts gradually increased. You made excuses that you were asked to give birthday presents, or that the requests came from me or my son. No, that's not. What are you talking about? You bought things other than gift baskets, labeling them as presents. This has never happened before. But it's our son's wife. Bob trusted you. He was told you took part-time lecturers to lunch, but in reality, you were dining and drinking tea with your mom friends. The suspicious receipts gradually increased, and Bob finally came to us. Even before that, my son had started investigating after noticing something strange. What? You betrayed the trust of all those who wanted to believe in you. It seems that dressing up is more important to you than anything else. It's not me, I didn't. Sarah looked at my brother-in-law as if begging for help, with a voice that's almost a whisper. But he just stared back coldly without saying a word. And if all this is true, I can't blame him. Karen is the opposite. Sure, she's not really into fashion, but she always puts herself second and values her family and her job. You seem to not care to know about her work, but being a certified arborist is an impressive qualification. I bet she studied hard for it. Oh. As Sarah was left speechless and utterly defeated, my mother-in-law suddenly started talking about me. Unconsciously, I felt a warmth welling up in my eyes. I respect her, thinking that if she wanted to continue her work, we should support her. Have you ever seen her working lively, not caring if her clothes get dirty, or her hands are covered in soil? And you make fun of her? I was teary-eyed and silent, and Sarah was unable to make any excuses or act anymore. She just hung her head low. Our tutoring school may not match the major corporations, but we value our teachers and students and have earned their trust. We've grown little by little by addressing each student's individual issues and those of their families. What's important is people and hearts. You are the one that doesn't belong here. You are the one who should leave. My mother-in-law, who had declared it so clearly, was truly awesome. After that, Sarah, who had been pretending to be a perfect, elegant wife, was forced to leave her wealthy family. My brother-in-law attempted to have a discussion, but Sarah, who refused to acknowledge her faults and was very angry, was served with divorce papers. Now that the embezzlement has been revealed, she won't be able to get any compensation, and she has nothing left. My brother-in-law will keep the custody of their son, and with the help of my father-in-law and mother-in-law, he will maintain their normal life. Sarah, who always put herself first, would take her anger out on her son when things didn't go her way. But the young boy nodded firmly at his father and grandparents' words of, "It'll be okay." The desire to send him to a private elementary school was Sarah's wish, but he apparently disliked being forced to study. These days, he's freely playing with our daughter. Of course, my husband and I intend to help in any way we can. On a leisurely day spent together at my in-laws' house, my mother-in-law approached me and said, "I'm really sorry for making you uncomfortable for so long. We should have noticed sooner." "No, not at all. I wasn't really bothered at first." "If you ever need anything in the future, don't hesitate to tell us." "Yes." As I said that, I remembered my mother-in-law's words. What's important is people and hearts. Maybe because I was staring at her, my mother-in-law looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Haha, it's nothing. I was just thinking how cool you are." "Well, thank you. But the cool one is you, being able to create such beautiful gardens. Maybe I should ask you to help with ours next time. I want to replant the flower bed." "Oh, absolutely. I would love to do it, even if it's not for work. Just let me know whenever." "You should charge her. Mom can be quite demanding." My husband chimed in with a playful comment, and we all laughed together. Value people, cherish hearts. I'll make sure to remember that. I hope to spend more time laughing with my precious family in the future.
I'm Alvina, a 34-year-old stay-at-home mom. My family of 4 includes my husband Morris, our 2 daughters who are in elementary school, and we also live together with my in-laws on the same property, making us a household of 6. Before marriage, I worked a job with night shifts, but Morris suggested, "I'd rather you quit if it means we don't cross paths as much," so I chose to leave my job. Since then, I devoted my time to raising our children when they were young and worked part-time when things got a bit more manageable. I wasn't very keen on the idea of living with my in-laws. At the point of contemplating living together, I was still uncertain about what kind of people they were, regardless of how wonderful they might be. I believed that a daughter-in-law living with her in-laws could lead to stress. So I felt relieved when Morris assured me before our marriage that we wouldn't have to live with his parents. However, right after we got married, Morris brought up the subject of living with his parents, saying, "I'm worried about my parents. What about living on the same property? It's not like we will be living in the same house, right?" I was taken aback and protested, but Morris countered, "Do you dislike my parents that much? We will live on the same property but separately. I just want to be near in case something happens. If our situations were reversed, wouldn't you want to live with your parents?" I found myself unable to refute him. My parents were still fit and healthy, living with my brother and his wife, so we were not going to live with them. I think that's why Morris could say things like, "If the roles were reversed, I would live with them." While I was still undecided and had not given my approval, Morris told me after a while, "My parents have already started building a house on our property. We can't refuse now." And so, we were forced into living together. Although I was unhappy, I managed to negotiate one condition. We will not interfere with each other's lives. And so, our shared property living arrangement began. My in-laws adhered to our agreement of non-interference. We led separate lives in our respective homes, and I joined them for meals once or twice a week. The house they built on our property was beautiful, and I even began to think that it might be a lucky break for us since we would inherit it eventually. However, that was a big mistake. My mother-in-law slowly started breaking our initial agreement. At first, she would visit our house once or twice a week and ask for help with tasks that I felt were reasonable, such as, "My back hurts a little, can you carry this?" Or, "I'm not feeling well today, can you prepare dinner?" However, over time, she started making demands like, "Isn't breakfast ready yet?" And, "Why hasn't our part of the house been cleaned?" As if it was a given that I would be doing all the housework. As a result, I ended up cooking all 3 meals and cleaning both houses. Morris didn't say anything about this. Only my father-in-law would say, "Sorry for always asking you to do this. Sometimes he would kindly offer me some snacks and say, "I know it's not much, but please have this." Not only did my mother-in-law make me do the housework, but she also started interfering with how we educated our children. She started saying things like, "They should take these lessons," or "It's strange that your 2 girls don't help with housework. What did you give birth to 2 girls for?" Yet every time mother-in-law lashed out at me, father-in-law would come to my defense. "You remember we had agreed to manage our respective homes, right?" Father-in-law would chide mother-in-law, who would say, "Oh right, I forgot. I guess I'm feeling weak and unwell, so I might have leaned on you a bit too much. I'm sorry." And she would apologize, at least on the surface. But a few hours later, when father-in-law wasn't looking, the harassment would start again. Even when I tried to tell Morris that this wasn't what we had agreed on, he would just say, "Even if you made an agreement at first, we're family, aren't we? We should be flexible when times get tough. It's your fault for not handling it well." I spent my days filled with frustration, and then suddenly, mother-in-law collapsed at home. We quickly called an ambulance, but mother-in-law passed away from a sudden seizure. I couldn't tell father-in-law or Morris, but part of me was relieved that the harassment would finally end. Despite our agreement to not interfere in each other's lives, father-in-law had always been kind to me, and I felt differently towards him. I did my best to take care of him and his needs. Father-in-law often thanked me, saying, "I'm sorry for breaking our agreement not to interfere. I just can't handle housework on my own. Thank you so much." Our daughters were very fond of their gentle grandfather, and we spent many peaceful days together. But sadly, this peace didn't last long. Just a few months after mother-in-law passed away, father-in-law suddenly collapsed too. Father-in-law survived, but he was bedridden and needed constant care. During a discussion about father-in-law's care, he mentioned wanting to go to a nursing home to avoid being a burden, but Morris stepped in. "Don't say things like that, Dad. Family should care for each other. Nursing homes are for when family absolutely can't. Alvina said she's okay with taking care of you," he said, completely taking me by surprise. I did love father-in-law. I wanted to do whatever I could to help him. Even if he went to a nursing home, I was planning to visit him frequently. But caring for him full-time at home was a different matter entirely. It was clear that Morris wouldn't help. As a stay-at-home mom with young kids to look after, taking care of father-in-law would be a significant challenge. But I couldn't express my reluctance in front of father-in-law, who was different from mother-in-law. I had no choice but to agree to his care. As expected, the caregiving was quite difficult. I needed to assist him with meals, bathroom visits, and bathing. Father-in-law was a robust, elderly man, and as a member of the opposite sex, we both felt uncomfortable at times. Every day, I'd assist with the kids' school preparations and breakfast, do housework during the day, care for the kids when they got home, and prepare dinner, all on top of caring for father-in-law. Every night before going to sleep, I'd think, "I somehow made it through the day." Then I would just collapse into bed. Morris, instead of helping with father-in-law's care, started spending even less time at home, citing work as an excuse. He claimed to have overnight work and only came home about 2 to 3 times a week. Furthermore, because I never knew when he'd come back home, I often struggled to prepare dinner in time. On days when my body ached from the sheer exhaustion, I prepared something simple. But even then, Morris would rage, "I'm working my tail off there, and this is the thanks I get?" When I asked him for a little help around the house or with caring for his father, he retorted, "You're a full-time homemaker, aren't you? Caring for my father is your job." I felt miserable every day. This distressing situation dragged on for 3 years. My 2 daughters grew older and began to help with housework and caring for their grandfather, which helped lighten the burden. Chantel pitched in every day, helping with cooking and cleaning. Janie tenderly wiped her grandfather's back each day, asking, "Does that feel good, Grandpa?" I was truly grateful to have such kind daughters. One day, Morris left his mobile phone at home when he went to work. Despite knowing better, I couldn't resist the temptation to take a look inside his phone. The password was his birthday, so I could unlock it instantly. What I found inside was a succession of shocking revelations. Unbelievably, Morris had been having an affair since around the time I started caring for his father, and they even had a child together. From their text messages, it was clear that Morris was also supporting his mistress financially. Although he'd given me money for living expenses and said, "I'll save the rest for our children's future," he hadn't saved a dime. The messages got worse. "My kid's already in elementary school, so he's not cute anymore," and "Caring for the old man is a pain, but thank God for my idle wife. It's a waste of money to put him in a care facility, but having my wife do it is free. Gotta make use of free labor, right? LOL. He was ridiculing me and our children. Under normal circumstances, I should have kept my cool and stayed silent until I had definitive evidence, but I was so furious, I couldn't remain calm. As soon as Morris got out of the bath, I shoved his mobile phone in his face and demanded, "What is this about?" At first, Morris seemed a little taken aback, but he quickly regained his composure. "You've lost your femininity since you had our kids," he said, scorn filling his words. "You've stopped wearing makeup, and your outfits are all about comfort. Since you started breastfeeding our second child and falling asleep with your mouth open, I felt completely turned off. And when you began caring for my dad, you lost even more of your femininity. You're not even a middle-aged woman anymore, more like a middle-aged man." His cruel words tore at my heart. But he didn't stop there. "You know, my girlfriend always wears makeup and takes care of her appearance, even after having a child," he continued, coldly asserting. "I have no plans to divorce you for appearance's sake, but my love is for her and our child. I'm not sure who'll go first, but once my dad is gone and our kids are adults, I plan to kick you out and live in the house with her." And so he continued to spew words indicating he considered me nothing more than trash, even though he appeared to have some concern for the children. I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I too want to dress up and put on proper makeup, but you didn't help with childcare or housework at all. Juggling unfamiliar childcare and trying to do housework perfectly, I had to do it frantically, even if it meant messing up my hair. If you wanted me to look beautiful, why didn't you help with housework, childcare, or even the elder care? And even without a payback, shouldn't a husband and a father naturally help out? I pleaded through my tears, but my words didn't resonate with Morris. "That's not true. Look at other women. They stay beautiful while raising their kids. As I've told you many times, it's just that you're not efficient. You, a stay-at-home mom, have no right to argue with me, the one who's putting food on the table," he coldly retorted. "If you have a complaint, you're free to divorce, you know? For a woman in her mid-30s like you, employment opportunities are limited, right? You think you can raise our 2 kids just because you'll get a bit of alimony and compensation from me?" he sneered. I felt struck in the worst possible way, and I couldn't say anything in return. Thinking about the children, I felt I couldn't divorce. Seeing this, Morris said, "You can't, can you? If you care about the kids, you'll take care of my father until the end. After that, you'll work as my housekeeper. But don't worry, when the kids grow up, they'll help you out. So you better treat them well." He then went into his room with a satisfied smirk. For a while, I was dumbfounded and remained in place. Somehow I managed to regain my sanity and went to attend to my father-in-law. I intended to act as usual, but it must have been clear something was wrong. My father-in-law asked, "Is something wrong?" I tried to brush it off, saying, "Nothing at all." I couldn't hold back my tears, and I ended up telling him everything. After hearing me out, he said, "Alvina, I have something to give you. Can you come back in a few hours?" I did as he asked, and when I went to him after a few hours, he handed me a piece of paper with someone's contact details and said, "Contact this person." He then added, "They know everything. I should be the one taking action, but with this body of mine." He smiled brightly. A few days later, Morris told me, "As I told you before, I will be on a business trip for a week from now. Well, I guess it's better for you too if we call it a business trip, right? I will enjoy the sightseeing, so I decided to take this opportunity to take action." And a week later, "Hey, what the hell's going on? I come home and everything is gone?" Morris was raging and half panicking when he called me. I replied, "Oh, my, how was your week-long affair trip? Did you enjoy it?" Morris shouted, "Hey, stop messing around. I'm asking what the hell is going on." I decided to explain to Morris. The contact that my father-in-law gave me was for a Mr. Quarry, an old friend of his and a well-known, large-scale landowner in the region. Apparently, Mr. Quarry had always coveted the land where my in-laws' house stood and had been trying to negotiate for it. However, my father-in-law would always refuse, saying, "I plan to leave it to my son." But after observing the behavior of his son Morris and hearing my story, he seemed to have decided that his son was a lost cause. We had known in advance that Morris was planning to take a week-long affair trip because he was openly defiant and didn't try to hide it at all. Before that week, I had a talk with Mr. Quarry and we arranged to sell the house and land. It was a piece of land that Mr. Quarry had wanted for quite some time, so he was willing to buy it at a price considerably higher than the market rate. And during that week, the house was demolished. My father-in-law had requested Mr. Quarry, "This might be a bit selfish, but given the circumstances, could you do the demolition during this period if you're planning to anyway?" So when Morris came back, all he found was an empty lot. And we're going to have a new house built with my money my father-in-law got from selling the old house and land. Upon hearing this, Morris tried to persuade me to return to him, saying, "But you're jobless, aren't you? Even if Dad builds a house, you can't expect to be supported for the rest of your life. What are you going to do without my income? It's going to be tough, right?" I replied, "Well, don't worry about that. I did have some concerns about that part, but my father-in-law and Mr. Quarry have done quite a bit. I got a job offer from a company run by an acquaintance who happens to be looking for employees." And then I asked him, "Morris, shouldn't you be worrying about yourself instead?" When Morris suspiciously asked, What do you mean? I told him, the company where you are working now, you got it because the president is a friend of your father's. But now that he's deciding to cut ties with you, he's spoken to the president. Feel free to fire him if this work is poor and he's committing adultery. The president responded, it was hard to say, but he's been acting like he can't be fired and causing trouble. Let's see what happens from tomorrow. All I heard from the other end of the line was a surprised, what? Then silence. He tried to excuse himself, saying, well, I mean, I might have said some things out of anger before, like I was going to leave you in the future, but come on, that can't be true. Don't take it seriously. We're family. We should stick together, right? Can't you mediate between me and Dad? So I told him, my family now is my daughters and my father-in-law. Goodbye, and hung up the phone. There were numerous calls from Morris after that, but I ignored them all. Later on, my divorce from Morris was finalized. I claimed compensation from Morris and his mistress. As Morris hadn't tried to hide his affair at all, I had gathered plenty of evidence. All of this information I heard from various people, such as the president of Morris's company, who was a friend of my father-in-law. Although it seems like extramarital affair wouldn't have led to this firing, astonishingly, Morris was embezzling company funds to support his double life. Morris was not only fired from his job, but he's also being sued for damages. He lost his home and job and tried to move in with his mistress, only to be dumped when she realized he had no money. On top of all of this, he was ordered to pay child support. Now Morris is spending his days job hunting while working multiple part-time jobs to pay off his debts and child support. As for me, I plan to live with my daughters and my father-in-law in a fully leased house until I move into the house that my father-in-law is building for us. When father-in-law offered to build the house, he said, I'm moving into a care facility. I want you and your daughters to live happily here, Alvina. I countered, what are you talking about, Dad? We're family. Besides, it would make the girls sad. Let's live together. Hearing this, my daughters also took father-in-law's hand and said, we want to live with Grandpa. With tears in his eyes, father-in-law thanked us. While the girls do help out, caring for him while working is indeed tough, so we are currently enjoying our life together as a family of 4 with the help of home assistants and day services. We can't wait to move into our new home as a family of 4.
What do you mean? I was supposed to shine brightest on this day, yet my expression was strained. Why would you say something like that now? My mother came rushing in as soon as she heard my voice. It was just before my wedding. Despite being in a dressing room, it was not the place for raised voices, but I was at my wits' end. My name is Emily. I am a 28-year-old employee. My father is a somewhat well-known business owner in our hometown, and I was able to graduate from college without any financial difficulties. However, my parents were always strict about the value of money, so I never wasted any. Since high school, I didn't receive any allowance and worked part-time. My local friends sometimes called me a down-to-earth lady, even though I was supposedly well off. But the truth is, I never thought of myself as such. During work, I saw a familiar face at a client's. It was my senior whom I liked in high school. His name is Tyler. He was popular for his good looks and because he was a member of the soccer team. I was the manager of the team and we used to talk a lot, but Tyler, 2 years my senior, retired that summer. Our contact faded away and he graduated. Could it be Emily? Tyler recognized me and called out. That brought back a flood of memories. He was as handsome as ever, and his suited-up look was strikingly different from before. After dating for a year triggered by that encounter, I got an official proposal from Tyler. I was ecstatic to prepare for our wedding. But Tyler would just say, "Do as you like, Emily," leaving everything to me. I was a bit displeased, thinking maybe he didn't care about the wedding. But since he told me to do as I liked, I decided to do just that. When we went to view the wedding venues, Tyler seemed somewhat restless. I didn't pry then, but it later turned into a big issue. After viewing several venues, I expressed my preference, but then Tyler surprisingly stated, I think this one is better. It was the first venue we visited, the one where Tyler was acting uneasy. It was a beautiful hotel with great food, so we decided on that venue. Tyler, who seemed to have no interest in the wedding, suddenly started actively participating in the planning. When I saw the venue, I got motivated, Tyler said without me even asking. Our assigned wedding planner was a woman named Palma, who was the same age as Tyler. Her overly friendly demeanor bothered me. I wanted to keep the wedding preparations within our budget, but Tyler agreed with whatever Palmer suggested, and before I knew it, we had gone over budget. There was a dress I desperately wanted to wear, and I wanted to allocate the budget for that, but it seemed impossible. When I talked to Taylor about it, he said, "Just ask your parents to pay for it, Emily. They'd surely help out with that." But I wanted to avoid that. I didn't want to throw a wedding that was beyond our means by relying on my parents for expenses. When I came back from a restroom break during the meeting, it appeared Tyler had mentioned this to Palmer, and she insisted I needed that dress. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. You'll regret it if you don't wear what you want, even if it means going over budget." I understood her point, but her overly friendly manner and tone that seemed more like a friend than a planner irritated me, and I refused her suggestion. When I tried on a dress within our budget, I surprisingly liked it on me. If we were to spend more money, I thought we should spend it on the guests instead. I came to terms with this myself. When I tried on the dress, Grieve, who was in charge, said something that bothered me. "Do you know Palmer?" When I denied knowing her, I thought Grieve seemed troubled. But I was so excited about my first wedding dress, I couldn't dwell on it. One day, when we were about to go for a wedding meeting, Tyler said he couldn't make it due to sudden work. Reluctantly, I went alone. Then, instead of the usual Palmer, Grieve showed up. Palmer had taken an unexpected leave, and Grieve was filling in. I found it easier to talk to Grieve. I took this opportunity to say that I wanted to change the plan recommended by Palmer, and Grieve agreed after hearing me out. I managed to choose the dress I had always wanted, while staying within our budget, and returned home in a great satisfaction. The next night, I received a call from Tyler. "You went ahead and changed the wedding plan on your own, didn't you?" His voice was lower than usual. "Palmer wasn't at the meeting yesterday, so Grieve took over. When I told her my wish, she changed it for me. Yesterday, Tyler was busy with overtime work, so I couldn't call him. I sent an email saying that I wanted to talk about the change in the plan and the details when we had time, but Tyler seemed unhappy. Was it because I changed the plan without consulting him, or was it because I reported it late? I am sorry I changed it without asking, but wasn't this the original plan? Tyler, you just went with what Palmer suggested, but you said you'd leave it to me in the first place." "That's rude to Palmer, who went out of her way to make the suggestion." Tyler's anger wasn't about the plan. It was about being rude to Palmer. Why was he defending the coordinator so much? "Tyler, do you prioritize Palmer's suggestions over my feelings?" When I asked more directly, Tyler sighed heavily. "Fine, I'll apologize to Palmer." With that, he hung up. What was that about? Why did it turn out this way? I was troubled, but I didn't want to ruin the wedding, so I apologized to Tyler the next day. I didn't know exactly what I was apologizing for, but I said, "I am sorry about yesterday." Tyler responded tersely, "Yeah, it's fine. I've already apologized to Palmer." Hearing that name again irked me, but getting angry now would defeat the purpose of my apology. I swallowed my feelings. Then Tyler suddenly changed his tone and began to speak. Oh, by the way, about our new home. Huh? New home? Aren't we moving into your company's apartment? We planned to register our marriage a month after the wedding on my birthday. Since we could move into Tyler's company's apartment, we thought it would be cheaper and decided to move after the registration. Despite that, Tyler shook his head. I thought about it, and living surrounded by my co-workers might be uncomfortable for you, Emily. I hadn't really thought about it, but my time at home was limited since I was also working. We had discussed maybe moving in the future, but for now our current place would do, or so we'd agreed. And then, out of nowhere, Tyler dropped a bombshell. Hey, what if we ask your father-in-law to give us some land, and we build a house there? I'm sure he'd do at least that much for his darling daughter, right? We can put it in my name, so it'd be better if we register our marriage first, wouldn't it? That way, once we're married, we can start right away. Hold on, what? I remember thinking during our wedding preparations that Tyler was relying too much on my parents' wealth. It was time for me to put my foot down. I've told you before, I don't want a life where we depend on my parents, and asking them to give us land is completely unreasonable. Both my mom and dad are very strict about money. There is no way they'd just hand it over. Surprised by my response, Tyler lost his momentum. I see. With a sullen expression, Tyler fell silent. Even though there was a sense of unease between us, the wedding day arrived. Until now, Tyler might have had the idea to lean on my parents because he was still single, but I believed that getting married would make him feel more grown up and responsible. With that in mind, we went ahead with the wedding. As I entered the waiting room, only Palmer was there to greet me. As soon as she saw Tyler, she left the room. Tyler followed her out. Watching this, one of the staff members in the room seemed to sigh. Despite the uneasiness, I tried to keep a smile on my face, determined to make this the best day of my life. Despite that, Grieve, one of the staff members present, said something unthinkable to me. Your life is over, you know. Excuse me? When I asked her what she meant, Grieve gave me a stem look and she said, Are you sure you want to marry that man? What do you mean? These weren't the kind of words you'd expect to hear from a wedding venue staff member. As I stood there confused, Grieve continued. If you don't mind me saying so, that man is cheating on you. The other staff members looked away, not understanding what was happening. On the verge of tears, I shouted out, Why are you saying this now? My voice echoed down the corridor. My mom hurried into the waiting room. She tried to calm me down, while Grieve, too, apologized and tried to get me to sit down. Finally, Grieve broke the news. I was certain after seeing Palmer's behavior earlier. Tyler is having an affair with Palmer. I turned pale. My mother simply said, I see. Her tone suggested she knew something. When I urged her to talk, she revealed that she had seen a man who looked like Tyler embracing a woman in another waiting room. She had gotten lost and accidentally peered into another room. She couldn't see their faces, so she didn't know who they were, and because she was in a hurry, she closed the door quietly and pretended she hadn't seen anything. She thought the man had a similar build to Tyler, but she had dismissed the thought that it could be him. The woman was wearing a black suit, and she assumed she was a hotel employee. When I described what Tyler was wearing today, my mother nodded. When Grieve asked my mother for more details, it became clear from the description of the hair and height that the woman was Palmer. My anger exploded. I was about to shout, but grief stopped me. Why are you stopping me? Please hold on, the staff will be back soon. The staff member, who'd left a short while ago, walks back in. Mrs. Grieve takes her mobile phone from the returning staffer and brings it over to me. On the screen, I see both Tyler and Mrs. Palmer. I can hear their conversation too. Once we are married, I get the land to build a house. If I play my cards right, they might build a house too. Then, immediate divorce. Tyler declares, chuckling. Next, a voice I assume is Mrs. Palmer's. Tyler, you're such a scoundrel. If it weren't for me, he would have been happy with her. The two of them laughing together. From their conversation, it seemed Mrs. Palmer was Tyler's ex-girlfriend. She wasn't at the high school, so she might have been his college classmate. Apparently, they met again during the venue inspection and got carried away with the idea that it was destiny. When wealthy and handsome men come for venue inspections, she gets close to them, has affairs, and causes breakups. According to Mrs. Grieve, who heard their conversation, Mrs. Palmer is a groom hunter. However, she always gets away with it because there is never any proof. Mrs. Grieve had noticed her behavior with Taylor and warned me about they might be having an affair. You could have put it more gently. I say, cautiously. She immediately responds with an apologetic, "I'm so sorry." She had been at a loss for how to broach the subject, then blurted out, "Your life is over," as time was running out to catch them in the act. I take a deep breath and say, "Is it okay if I end his life?" I was going to bring Tyler's life to an end. After I finished changing, Tyler came in. "Isn't it beautiful? I want you to take a picture," I say. Tyler, smiling, takes out his phone and snaps a picture. "Let me see," I request, taking the phone from his hand. At that moment, Mrs. Grieve takes Tyler away to touch up his makeup. I start to search Tyler's phone for evidence of his affair. There are plenty of photos and exchanged messages. I never touched Tyler's phone, so he must have been careless. There was no passcode, and I might not have found the evidence if not for this situation. I screenshot the incriminating conversations and to transfer them to my phone. When Tyler comes back and I hand him his phone, Mrs. Palmer finally shows up. Other staff members had been keeping Mrs. Palmer busy. She had caused many grooms to call off their weddings and resented by nearly all the staff who lost their sales because of her. Tyler must have switched to Palmer's plan to support her sales. I guess he thought he could always beg my family for more money if he ran out. Thanks to the teamwork of the staff present, I was able to gather evidence of the affair. And then the reception begins. The next item on the agenda was to play the How the Bride and Groom Met movie. As the movie begins, Tyler yells out, "Hey, what the hell is this?" The screen displayed footage of him and Mrs. Palmer in a different room, acting intimately. All these were evidences of his infidelity, captured by me in screenshots. A furious yet pale-faced Tyler. I saw Palmer trying to leave the venue, but she was stopped by Grieve and her staff. The hall buzzed with commotion, Tyler's college mates looking at the pair with scornful eyes. I took the microphone. "Given the circumstances, I must apologize. Everyone will return the gift cards from the party. Please enjoy the food and treat this as a dinner party." I glared at Tyler. "So, you were after my family's money all along, huh? What's this about rekindling with an ex-girlfriend who works at the venue? Isn't it odd to speak of destiny when you're the groom and she's the staff? The red thread of the fate is supposed to be severed, right?" As I said this, I was met with applause of agreement from the audience. I'm glad we didn't complete our registration. You were about to tarnish my family register. I'm satisfied just being able to wear this dress and take pictures. I will sue you for compensation in the divorce trial for your affair, as well as the wedding expenses. Unsurprisingly, the wedding was cancelled. I returned the gift cards to my invitees. My disgruntled father, who had witnessed everything, arranged for a lawyer, and I went hard after Tyler. He had to pay every penny for his cheating, for breaking off the engagement, and for the wedding expenses. And not just Tyler, but Palmer too. After a while, I received an apology from Tyler. It was a momentary lapse in judgment. I realized that I truly love you, Emily. Please, let's reconcile. How dare he say such a thing? People like you are bound to cheat again due to such lapses. You don't love me, you love my family's money. Well, after the hefty compensation from the divorce trial, I'm fairly wealthy now. At this, Tyler's face turned red with anger. You are a failure as a wife if you can't forgive a single lapse. Seems like that was his punchline. Well, I'm not your wife, so call me a failure or whatever you like. Laughing, I hung up the phone. Word about Tyler and Palmer spread among our classmates. It even reached their bosses and co-workers, and they had to quit their jobs. They sent me emails full of their misery, but I blocked them. Palmer abused her position to use a groom's contact information for personal use. She was sued for damages by her employer, and I sued her for compensation. She lost her job and had to work at a grocery store, looking completely exhausted. This is what I heard when Grieve came to apologize. As for me, I immersed myself in work. Work is enjoyable, but now I'm looking forward to joining a marriage party to find someone I can truly marry.
My name is Sharon. I met my husband Ryan through a mutual friend. Ryan was a very kind man, and we got married shortly after meeting. Our whirlwind romance led to a marriage just 3 months after we met, shocking our friends and family. But even now, 3 years into our marriage, we're living happily together. However, as with anything, there have been a few challenges. Since our marriage, the most difficult issue for me has been dealing with my mother-in-law. Her house is within walking distance from ours, but unless it's absolutely necessary, I try to avoid visiting. Why? Because she has a way of subtly bullying me when her husband and Ryan can't hear. This started the very first time I met her. When I went to introduce myself to my future in-laws, there was a moment when we ended up alone together. That's when she dropped her voice and asked me, "Sharon dear, where did you go to college?" I wondered if your educational background had anything to do with marriage, but when I told her where I went, she frowned and said, "Oh, I've never heard of it. You must have married Ryan for his money, didn't you?" I was so taken aback that I couldn't respond. I was shocked not only by her sudden, mean-spirited expression when Ryan and her husband weren't around, but also by what she said. Yes, Ryan is a doctor and a Harvard graduate. He probably has a lot of money, but we had decided to keep our finances separate. I had no idea how much money Ryan actually had. I thought it was strange that you got married after only 3 months. Listen here, Ryan is a gem. He's a doctor who graduated from Harvard. That's a big deal. Compared to that, I've never heard of your college. You must have gone to some third-rate university. If you married Ryan for his money, you should end it right now. I didn't marry him for his money. I truly want to be with Ryan. That's why I wanted to get married. Liar. You look like a fool. Can't bear the thought of someone like you having Ryan's child. Can you imagine a child with your stupid genes? The child would be pitiful, especially after I gave birth to such a smart son like Ryan. Don't worry, Ryan and I have decided not to have children. Ryan and I are both career-oriented. We're proud of our work, and when we decided to get married, we agreed not to have children. Despite her irritating comments, I managed to keep my anger in check and tell her our decision, which seemed to take her by surprise. "What?" she exclaimed, her eyes wide open. After a moment of stunned silence, she glared at me. "So, you're infertile, right?" "No, that's not it. We just decided not to have children." "Lies! It's unheard of for a married couple not to have children if they can. Ugh, why did Ryan decide to marry a woman like you? His life was perfect until now." In response to her lament, I found myself speechless. That's when I remembered Ryan confessing, during a family discussion, "Honestly, I don't really like my mom." Mother-in-law had always been more concerned about Ryan's education and career, rather than Ryan himself. Even then, mother-in-law was about to say something else, but as soon as father-in-law returned, she promptly switched back to her amiable self. When she said, "It's a pleasure to have a beauty like you, Sharon, in our home," with the same mouth she just used to insult me, it gave me the creeps. This mother-in-law, who plays the good wife and mother in front of father-in-law and Ryan, had been wearing this mask since marrying father-in-law. Although she seemed devilish, since mother-in-law kept her opposition to the marriage hidden, but remained cordial in public, Ryan and I were able to get married without a hitch. Even now, 3 years into our marriage, mother-in-law continues to secretly harass me. She had been bad-mouthing me to the neighbors, so when I went to the in-laws' house for some business, it deeply bothered me to see the neighboring ladies whispering about me. There was also a time when I went to visit mother-in-law because she was reportedly unwell, only to find her fit as a fiddle, using the absence of father-in-law and Ryan as an opportunity to lay into me. She went on and on, saying things like, "Isn't it sad for Ryan to live with a fool like you, Sharon? I've heard that when the IQ gap is too great, conversation becomes impossible. Can you two even communicate? I remember Ryan saying he didn't want kids. Are you infertile, or does Ryan not want to pass on your foolish genes? Either way, poor Ryan for marrying you. But the one I feel sorry for the most would be any child who gets those dumb genes. Good for you, Sharon, for being infertile. You always look like a fool to me since we first met. It's embarrassing to think that someone like you is my daughter-in-law. Please lower your face when walking around the neighborhood. It's disgraceful." Though I was quite irritated, I held my tongue and listened without retort. Not because I was a timid wife, but because I was waiting for the right time. The moment I was waiting for was mother-in-law's birthday. Every year on her own birthday, mother-in-law invites me and Ryan to her house and cooks for us. When is my birthday? It's not too much to ask for a meal together as a family, is it? It would be hard for her son Ryan to decline. We've been invited for meals on mother-in-law's birthday every year, this being the 3rd time. For the 1st and 2nd birthday celebrations, I thought, it's not fair to Ryan and father-in-law to put up with mother-in-law's behavior. I can handle it on my own. But my patience, which isn't particularly enduring, had reached its limit. At this year's birthday meal, just as we were enjoying the usual meal and chatting casually with drinks in hand, I took out my phone with a smile. "Excuse me for springing this on you, but I've decided that today will be the last time I come here." Everyone was taken aback by what I said. Feeling a bit guilty for shocking not just mother-in-law, but father-in-law and Ryan too, I continued. "Actually, I've been receiving quite a lot of nasty comments from mother-in-law behind my back, and I simply can't bear it anymore. Just seeing her face has been giving me hives recently. This stress is too much, so I've decided not to come to this house anymore." My father-in-law asked my mother-in-law, "Did you really say something?" Caught off guard, she quickly shook her head. "I didn't say anything." "I didn't say anything at all. Is it possible you misunderstood something, Sharon?" She plastered on her usual smile, but her eyes didn't share the sentiment. I felt the pressure from her to keep silent, but I had no reason to comply. I reached for my phone lying on the table and played an audio recording. You, with no education, being the wife, it's unbearable. Day in, day out, the thought of you as the wife sends chills down my spine and brings nightmares. At the sound of the tirade coming from my phone, my father-in-law and Ryan were stupefied, while she turned as pale as a ghost. One after another, I played her hurtful words from my phone. I had been silently recording her tirades, waiting for the perfect moment to use them. Why the woman who can't even have children staying at home? Go outside and work for a change. You claim to work from home, but that's a lie, isn't it? Living off Ryan's money, you're nothing but a leech. Hey, Mom. The one who finally spoke up amidst the relentless stream of hurtful words was Ryan, his face as red as a beet. Why are you saying such terrible things to Sharon? And to think you said all this where Dad and I couldn't hear? That's just too devious. No, it's not true. It's all lies. Lies? With all this evidence, you think we're going to believe your excuses now? Faced with the anger of her beloved son, she seemed lost and confused, repeating over and over like a broken record. It's not true. It's all lies. In his rage, Ryan said to her, You've been going on about education and calling Sharon stupid, but she's a Harvard graduate, just like me. What? She seemed so shocked she might topple over. But it's true. I'm a Harvard graduate. Well, when I asked Sharon about her college, she mentioned some university I've never heard of, she began. And I decided to use this opportunity to retaliate for all the times I'd remained silent. I attended a university in Japan because I wanted to further my Japanese studies after graduating from Harvard. It seems like you were unaware. Well, if that's the case, why didn't you say so? Even if I had told you that I graduated from Harvard, you were going to badger me about being infertile. Whether I retorted or not, if you were just going to keep criticizing me, I saw no point in defending myself. Also, you seem to think I was idling around at home, but I've been working all along. As I spoke, I pulled out a thick book from my bag. This was a book I'd decided to bring along today, despite its weight. Seeing her dumbfounded expression made me feel it was all worth it. It's sold in bookstores. Yes, it's a bestseller and will soon be adapted into a movie. The book is written by a Japanese author, and I'm the one who translated it. She had refused to believe I was working from home, but I've been a translator all along. Thankfully, I've received work from various places, and if you search my pen name online, you'll find numerous articles. I'm a fairly well-known translator. Seeing mother-in-law with her mouth agape, father-in-law, who had been silent for a while, softly spoke up. Mother, there's something you need to say to Sharon. Huh? He means you need to apologize. I had no idea you could say such horrible things behind someone's back. Sharon, I'm sorry for not realizing this sooner. You must have had a hard time. Now, Mother, you should apologize too. Despite the fact that father-in-law, who did nothing wrong, was the first to apologize, prideful mother-in-law raised her shrill voice. No way! After all, I didn't know. I didn't know that Sharon was a Harvard graduate, or such a prominent translator. If I had known, I would have never said such awful things. Regardless of who Sharon is, she's the woman that Ryan chose. You should be treating her with respect. Education and career don't matter. If Sharon treats Ryan well, as parents, we should have no complaints. Mother-in-law, Ryan, and I were all taken aback by the usually quiet and gentle father-in-law's angry voice. Father-in-law glared at mother-in-law and urged her once more. Apologize. But mother-in-law, who would not bow to a daughter-in-law, declared, I've done nothing wrong, and retreated to her room. Go home for today. Sharon, I'm truly sorry. After father-in-law said this, Ryan and I decided to go home. When I apologized to Ryan for causing the situation, he replied, I'm sorry for making you endure this. I realized once again what a wonderful husband I have. That evening, the intercom rang insistently. When I went outside, a sobbing mother-in-law was hunched over, continuously bowing her head. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Tell Dad to forgive me too, please. What happened? Just as I was recoiling from mother-in-law's pitiful state, father-in-law came running over, trying to get mother-in-law to stand up by saying, "Stop it! It's disgraceful!" Before the shocked us, mother-in-law said, "Stop! I can't go home until I'm forgiven!" And then uttered a shocking phrase. "If I'm not forgiven, Dad will abandon me!" A sighing father-in-law explained the situation. He had become disillusioned after seeing the true nature of mother-in-law, with whom he had spent many years. When mother-in-law persistently refused to apologize to me, father-in-law had told her, "I didn't think you were like this. I don't have the confidence to continue living with you." That's why a crying mother-in-law had rushed over to our house. "Sorry for causing a commotion. I'll take Mom home. Sharon, I'm truly sorry. Ryan, I'll contact you later about what will happen between Mom and Dad." "All right." "No! No!" As father-in-law forcefully took away the childishly protesting mother-in-law, Ryan, watching their retreating backs, had an expression of mixed disbelief and sadness. I found myself in a similar situation, seeing my mother-in-law shrink away. My in-laws fought for several months after that, but in the end, they divorced. My mother-in-law moved out of the house, apparently relocating to a small town in the countryside using the money she got from her ex-husband. Their squabbles could be heard all over the neighborhood. Whenever I passed by, the same local woman who had given me cold stares asked me what had happened to that house. I dismissed them briskly, saying, "I don't know. I'm not obligated to provide gossip for their chit-chat." My father-in-law has been living independently since his divorce from my mother-in-law. He once told me, "I was fooled by her in so many ways for such a long time." Perhaps she had been hiding many things from him, not just the fact that she was bullying me behind my back. Ryan accepted his parents' divorce right away. Ryan even expressed sympathy for his father, saying, "I can't live with a person who can say such things to others." My mother-in-law tried to contact Ryan several times, but in the end, he blocked her number. He was tired of her constantly warning him not to be deceived by me every time she called. Having been abandoned by her husband and son, my mother-in-law is now renting a small room in a far-off town. She once told Ryan that she felt lonely in an unfamiliar place without any acquaintances, but Ryan dismissed it, saying, "It's your own fault that it's come to this." As for me, with my only problem, my relationship with my mother-in-law, now out of the picture, I feel a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I continue to live a happy life with my kind husband, Ryan.
When is Teresa ever going to leave this house? It's quite embarrassing to have a shut-in neat around the house. Have you planned your move yet? I'll be out of here by today. I can't stand the sight of you, Lenny, anyway. It was clear to anyone that Lenny, my sister-in-law, who ridiculed me with a smirk, was trying to take over our house. However, there was a reason. I decided to move out and let her have the house. I had a firm belief that Lenny would not be able to live in this house for long. My name is Teresa. I live with my dad, Mom, and Lenny, my brother's wife. My brother was assigned to work overseas shortly after getting married, and Lenny firmly refused to live abroad. Lenny ended up living in our house, shamelessly so, despite being in the so-called newlywed stage and living separately from my brother. I remember well the day Lenny came to our house. She brought a lot of luggage with her and said without any remorse, "Edwin has gone overseas, so his room is vacant, right? I've decided to live there." My parents and I were baffled when Lenny came to the house without any prior discussion. When we called my brother to ask for an explanation, he was also surprised by Lenny's actions. Though my brother, who had just been assigned overseas, did respond, it was ultimately up to my parents and me, who were in direct contact with Lenny, to have the discussion. After getting married, Lenny was supposed to live in the house where my brother lived alone. However, when we asked why she suddenly came to the house, Lenny said the room was too small. I had been to my brother's room, and it didn't seem too small. But Lenny had already unilaterally terminated the lease of my brother's room. Since her parents lived far away and our house was conveniently located for her to get to work, she insisted on living in the house. Naturally, my parents were angry about Lenny's outrageous behavior, but Lenny was smart. Edwin has gone overseas, and I'm lonely too. Of course, I plan to contribute financially since I'll be living here. I'll also do my best with housework, so please, let me stay in this house. When Lenny pleaded like this, my parents couldn't refuse. I think one of the reasons my parents couldn't strongly reject Lenny was for my brother's sake. My parents didn't seem to mind living with Lenny, which had started suddenly. They were angry about her coming without any discussion, but Lenny was doing housework, as she said, going to work, and paying rent to my parents. However, I was nothing but dissatisfied. For some reason I don't know, Lenny had made me her enemy. "Oh, Teresa, you're as unattractive as ever today." I was utterly surprised when she said that as soon as she saw me when I came out of my room in the morning. I don't think my face is attractive at all, but I was naturally surprised when she suddenly said such a thing. "Teresa, aren't you ashamed to be a shut-in all the time? Edwin is so respectable, going on an overseas assignment, and my in-laws have earned enough to live in such a large house, while you, Teresa, are just a neat, playing at home all the time. I would be too ashamed to stay in such a house if I were you." Today, my parents were at work and Lenny seemed to be off. Is she assuming I won't tell our parents about her nasty words? No need to feel embarrassed. I'm not a neat, I answer, laughing internally at her absurdity. Sure, my job requires me to be at home a lot, but that doesn't make me a neat. But my sincere answer simply triggers a burst of laughter from Lenny. "Oh, come on, Teresa. Your brother's a successful man, and I work for a prestigious company. Even your parents are respected employees. I understand you might feel a bit inferior, but there's no need to lie." "I'm not lying. I'm an influencer." "An influencer? Please, stop making me laugh. As if someone as plain as you could be an influencer. That's a job for gorgeous models." She responds, brushing her elegantly curled hair off her shoulder, ignoring my protests, and shoving past me. As she strides away, a heavy cloud of her perfume lingers in the air. "When will you finally move out, Teresa? It's so embarrassing to have a shut-in neat in the house. Have you found a new place yet?" She suddenly stops mid-stride, turning around with a malicious grin on her face. "I'll give you an allowance, Teresa. You must be in dire need of money, right? It's only fair for all the housework you do." Laughing softly, she pulls a few $10 bills from her wallet and throws them onto the floor. "Well, see you," she says, leaving the house. Her dismissive attitude really gets under my skin. I'm not only frustrated with Lenny, but also disappointed with my brother's lack of discernment. Did they really think I would just stay silent after such a provocation? Perhaps Lenny saw me as a quiet and meek sister-in-law, but I'm not the type of woman to just sit back and take it. I pick up the strewn money, open the door to Lenny's room without her permission, and throw it inside. She sure had a lot of nerve, acting so high and mighty over a few tens of dollars. Luckily for me, I'm not strapped for cash. I had planned to relax today, but now it seems I'll be quite busy. After tidying up and finishing my work for the day, I start packing my things. I can't stand living under the same roof as Lenny any longer. I decide to move in to my boyfriend's house. Nathan, my boyfriend, with whom I've been discussing marriage plans, is understanding and agrees to accommodate me as soon as I explain the situation. Meanwhile, I make a call to a certain place in the morning. From the moment she came to greet us as a prospective wife, Lenny had always looked down on me. She's probably the type of person who needs to assert her dominance over someone to feel alive. By the time I finish my tasks, my parents return home. I don't mention anything about Lenny. Instead, I join my parents for dinner, a meal I had prepared. Lenny, who had claimed to be out with friends, hadn't returned yet. She said she wouldn't be home for dinner, so I guess she'll return late. I chose not to tell my parents about Lenny yet, waiting for the right moment. Lenny was in for a surprise, and I planned to hit her with it at the worst possible moment. I'm moving in with Nathan starting today. I'll be out of here by tonight. That's quite sudden. Nathan's okay with it? Yep, he agreed, and we're thinking about getting married soon. Well, as long as it's fine by him, just make sure to let him know we said hi. I broke the news to my worried parents, finished washing the dishes with my melancholic mom, and then I picked up my packed belongings and headed out of my room. And there, right on cue, stood Lenny. Dolled up in heavy makeup, Lenny's grin stretched across her face like she'd just spotted her prey. When will you finally leave this house, Teresa? It's so embarrassing to have a shut-in neat like you around. Is your moving day coming soon? I'll be gone today. Trust me, I'm as eager to get away from you as you are to see me gone. Lenny's expression twisted in response to my direct reply. She glared at her cheeky sister-in-law. Her ugly face was truly a sight to behold. No offense to my brother, but I could do without a sister-in-law like her. The next time we'd meet, I'd be ready to serve her a dose of revenge. Well, excuse me then. I bid Lenny farewell, said goodbye to my parents who were relaxing in front of the television downstairs, and left the house. Nathan had said to me, "You probably won't need to deal with your sister-in-law again." But I loved my brother. He was a good-natured man being duped by Lenny, and I couldn't just stand by knowing that. Thanks for your concern, but Lenny needs to be completely ousted from our house. A few days after I left home, I got a call from Mom. You, giving us such a shock by suddenly sending that. Just come home and explain. We've already informed your brother, but he can't make it back right away, so we'll video call him. We've also asked Lenny to take off from work, so hurry back. I responded to Mom's call, which came in late in the afternoon with an okay, and after texting Nathan that I was heading to my parents' house, I left. The family house that I returned to after several days felt heavy with tension the moment I walked in. As I approached the living room, Lenny's cries became louder. When I opened the door, Lenny was hunched over in front of my parents, seated on the sofa. I could feel her glaring at me. Teresa, this is terrible. Why would you send these pictures? Lenny pointed to a series of pictures sprawled across the coffee table. The pictures were of Lenny with various men at different locations, some with arms linked, hands held, images of intimacy. The sender, as Lenny indicated, was, of course, me. Private investigators can be quite useful, I thought. On the morning I left home, I had contacted a private investigator to check if my sister-in-law was cheating, transferred the money, and that was it. From just that, such indisputable evidence was procured. You're the terrible one. What do you mean by doing whatever you want just because I'm not there? The one shouting was my brother, connected via video call. His face, displayed on the screen, was beet red from anger. Lenny cried out to my brother, "But I was lonely. You always travel abroad even though we're newlyweds, Edwin. You left me alone. You're the one at fault, Edwin." I could feel the anger radiating from my parents' faces, but I calmly stated, "You're right. The fault lies with my brother." Lenny's expression turned to one of disbelief as she looked at me. I leveled my gaze at her, allowing no warmth to seep through. "The real problem is my brother's lack of judgment in choosing a woman like you." Lenny, taken aback at my words, leaned in toward me, fuming. "What? You've got some nerve, you hideous shut-in, telling me such things. All this chaos, it's your fault. Despite the presence of my parents and brother, Lenny couldn't hold back her true colors. As she realized what she had just blurted out, her hand flew to her mouth. But it was too late. My parents and brother were taken aback, but I just flatly declared, Lenny is always like this. Lenny thinks of me as an ugly shut-in. She played the nice girl in front of everyone else, but she cheats and she doesn't hesitate to be abusive to anyone she perceives as beneath her. My brother is also at fault for choosing to marry such a person. I was just stating the truth. After all, Teresa is a shut-in, not an influencer. That's just a lie, right? The one who sighed at Lenny's brazen defiance was Mom. I had no idea that Lenny was like this. Yes, Teresa spends a lot of time at home, but she's not a shut-in. She's a real influencer. Eh? As Lenny gasped in surprise, I shared the name I use for my influencer activities. I suggested she look it up on her mobile phone, and she hurriedly began her search. Upon seeing the search results, a flustered Lenny looked back and forth between me and her phone. Then, with an expression of disbelief, she pointed at me. Really? Teresa is this person? Yep. Makeup is like magic, isn't it? I'm a beauty influencer. Born with a nondescript face, I use makeup to transform it, creating countless videos of my makeovers and posting them online. I sometimes receive requests from cosmetic companies to advertise their products in my videos. Thankfully, I have a large fan base, and when people think of beauty influencers, my name is often one that comes to mind. This house was built with the money Teresa earned. This huge house? Lenny gasped in response. I guess it's hard to believe that someone like me could have built a house in such a prime location so close to the station. As Lenny stood there, dumbfounded, the doorbell rang. Wondering who could be visiting at such an hour, I, the only one standing, answered it. A familiar voice rang out. Can I come in? Yeah, sure, I responded, and the owner of the voice entered. Seeing Nathan walk in through the living room door, Lenny recoiled. What? Why is Nathan here? Oh, you must be the sister-in-law I've heard about. It's nice to know you recognize me. Thank you. Nathan replied, his radiant smile lighting up the room. He's been an actor since his childhood. We had met at a social gathering for content creators and hit it off right away. Nathan and I had been in a relationship for several years, but we kept it a secret. Upon Nathan's appearance, it seemed that Lenny really believed that I was an influencer. Lenny weakly murmured, "No way." From the other side of the screen, my brother told her, "This isn't a time for you to be upset about that." Things quickly spiraled from there. My brother declared to Lenny that he would demand a settlement and file for divorce. He was going to take a break and return to the U.S., and until then, he instructed Lenny to wait. Lenny's parents lived far away, so she had to stay at our house until my brother returned. With our parents looking at Lenny as if she were something disgusting, it was clear that the days until my brother's return would be harsh and painful for her. Once we confirmed that my brother had escaped a woman like Lenny, Nathan and I decided to head home. On the drive back, I asked Nathan, "Why did you come with me?" He replied, "I didn't want my future wife, Teresa, to be mistreated." I found myself smiling at Nathan's kindness. My brother returned to the States 2 weeks later. During that time, Lenny had apparently taken a leave and locked herself in her room. While drafting the divorce papers, she was said to be crying, "I love Edwin the most." But my brother didn't waver at all. After the divorce was finalized, Lenny apparently began living alone. But the men who used to entertain her wouldn't associate with her anymore due to the shock of the divorce and her subsequent weight loss. Unable to receive help from anyone, Lenny repeatedly called my brother, but he blocked her calls. Furthermore, he went abroad again, leaving Lenny with no one to rely on. She quit her job and returned to her parents' home. Ironically, Lenny, who used to mock shut-in neets, had become one herself. Since then, my brother has been careful about his relationships with women, but he met a wonderful woman abroad and married her. The new sister-in-law, a brave woman with beautiful blonde hair, is learning English so that she can communicate with me and our parents. In time, Nathan and I also got married. Our wedding made the news. The marriage of Nathan, who had been beloved since his childhood acting days, was celebrated, and I was accepted by the public as Nathan's wife. Now that everything is resolved and peaceful, my family and I are living happily.
Mom ate all the cookies. Make her spit them out now.
After my husband shouted this frantically over the phone, my mother-in-law suddenly began to choke, foaming at the mouth, and collapsed. In utter confusion, I called an ambulance, and she was rushed to the hospital. Once there, the test revealed something shocking in her stomach.
Do you have any idea about this?
Do I have any idea? Of course I do. Because what they found was clearly something intended to take my life. My name is Susan, a 32-year-old mystery novelist. I've been married to my husband John for 5 years. However, he's been on assignment in Alaska for the past 6 months. We keep in touch, but he seems so busy that he often doesn't even read my texts. Still, I've been trying to make sure he doesn't feel too lonely, even sending presents with Christmas cards to make him feel less alone. In January, I sent a New Year's card, and in February, I sent Valentine's chocolates. He responded to each with a simple thank you text message. In March, a box of cookies arrived from him, accompanied by a message that read,
I enjoyed your Valentine's chocolates.
I was so excited when I saw the cookies that I immediately called him. The cookies arrived. Thank you so much.
Thank you, too, for the New Year's card and chocolates. I'm sorry I couldn't come home for the holidays.
No worries. It's hard to book flights during that time, and the tickets are expensive.
Actually, these are the first cookies I've ever baked. I hope you like them.
Really? I'll savor them while I'm working on my novel. However, while I was on the phone, I heard a crunching noise behind me. Turning around, I found Linda, my mother-in-law who lives with us, devouring the cookies sent to me. She has a tendency to thoughtlessly eat the snacks I've been looking forward to, as she loves food. Writing mystery novels requires a lot of brain power. I always look forward to treating myself with some sweets while I'm writing. So I've cautioned mother-in-law several times, but she never changes her ways. Before we knew it, she had gobbled down all the cookies. Oh!
Huh? What's up? You already ate the cookies?
I'm sorry. I took my eyes off for a second and mother-in-law ate them all.
What? Mom ate all the cookies I sent? Make her throw them up now.
Why should I? Before I could question my husband's frantic outburst, mother-in-law suddenly began choking, her eyes wide open.
I can't breathe.
And with that, mother-in-law collapsed, frothing at the mouth. What? Mother-in-law, are you okay? Mother-in-law! I hurriedly hung up the call with my husband and dialed 911 while calling out to mother-in-law. She was rushed to the hospital, and I went along in the ambulance pleading, Hang in there, mother-in-law. When we got to the hospital, they pumped her stomach and analyzed the contents. The results were shocking.
Actually, we detected a certain poison in Linda's stomach.
The doctor went on to explain to my son's self that the poison was a highly dangerous substance, odorless and tasteless. It could kill a person with as little as 1 to 3 ounces, and mother-in-law had ingested more than half of that lethal dose. She would need to stay in the hospital for a while for treatment.
I hate to ask, but do you have any idea how she might have ingested this poison?
At the doctor's words, I remembered what mother-in-law had eaten just before, and I felt a cold shiver of terror. This couldn't be. It had to be a mistake. I sat in a chair by my mother-in-law's still unconscious form, my thoughts a blank. But I had to confirm. As soon as I got home to prepare for my mother-in-law's hospital stay, I called my husband. He seemed worried about mother-in-law's sudden collapse.
Is Mom okay?
It looks like she'll have to stay in the hospital for a while. She's unconscious after ingesting poison. The cookies mother-in-law ate just before she collapsed? You made them, right?
Are you trying to say you suspect me?
Suddenly, my husband's tone hardened. But from the situation, that's the only explanation that makes sense.
Susan, if you're a mystery writer, you should know you can't accuse someone just based on circumstantial evidence. Are you trying to treat me like a criminal without any real proof?
My husband criticized me harshly. It was frustrating, but he was right. But then he said something that made me question my ears.
If anything, you were the one closest to Mom. You're the one who looks suspicious.
What? Are you trying to pin the blame on me?
Well, you started this by suspecting me first, didn't you?
We ended up in a blame game for a while. Finally, my husband lost his temper.
Enough. You can't call the cops without evidence. Anyway, I'm not coming back, so you better take care of Mom.
He slammed down the phone after yelling at me like that. I was shocked, having just had an argument with my husband and then being accused by him. I stared blankly at my phone for a while, but slowly anger started to bubble up within me. Oh, so that's how it is. If you're going to play that way, I'll collect the evidence myself and corner you. Pumping myself up, I grabbed a pair of white gloves and a clear bag used by police to hold evidence from my study. Originally, I bought them as props for the mystery novels I write. Who knew life would bring me a moment to use them in reality? But even with all that said, I didn't know where to start. After all, this was my first time dealing with a real-life situation like this. Despite writing about such things in my novels, I decided to start by examining the area where my mother-in-law had been. The scene was left untouched since the chaos when she fell ill, not even vacuumed. Like a bloodhound, I crawled around the sofa where she had been sitting, and the surrounding area, straining my eyes looking for anything. Is this a piece of cookie? I found something that looked like a piece of cookie my mother-in-law had been eating, picked it up with tweezers, and carefully put it into the bag. Each piece was small, but my mother-in-law often spilled her food, so I managed to collect enough to test for poison. I was also able to gather crumbs from the original cookie box. But this alone wouldn't be strong enough evidence. As my husband said, it's possible that I could have planted it, unless I can get a solid piece of evidence that clearly points to my husband. At this point, a question occurred to me. If my husband really did it, how did he obtain such a dangerous poison? I decided to look into how he could have acquired it. So I phoned a police officer acquaintance of mine, whom I'd gotten to know during research for my novels. As I listened to the police officer's explanation and took notes, I reached a certain possibility. Although I had hoped it wasn't the case, that's what it was. In fact, I had been recording all of my conversations with my editor to refer back to later. I had a hunch about my husband's behavior, so I played back our past conversations, and my suspicions were confirmed. That's right, he no longer loves me. I loved my husband. I never missed giving him presents on occasions like Christmas, New Year's Day, and Valentine's Day, and always kept in touch regularly. But his heart was already moving away from me, realizing that he might even harbor ill will towards me. Tears involuntarily streamed down my cheeks. But crying alone doesn't solve anything. I called my mom, explained the situation, and asked her to take care of my mother-in-law, then hastily booked a flight and a hotel to Alaska, keeping it a secret from my husband. Once there, I staked out the apartment where my husband lived alone. Alaska in March was still covered with snow. I layered a heavy sweater under my down jacket, and, shaking from the cold, I watched my husband. When he left, I carefully followed him, camera in hand, making sure not to be noticed. This was purely my determination and stubbornness. Nevertheless, after a few days, I had collected all the necessary evidence. Now it was time to corner my husband. I stood in front of my husband's apartment and rang the doorbell.
Hey, what? Susan, what are you doing here?
Hello, John. It's been a while since we've met face to face. With a grin, I casually said, standing around in the entryway is no good. Let's talk inside. And I made my way into my husband's room.
So what brings you here?
With a grumpy face, my husband served me a weak coffee. It was his roundabout way of asking me to leave. Oh, is it so inconvenient for a wife to visit her husband?
That's not exactly what I meant.
You don't have to lie. You have a date with another woman after this, don't you? My husband, who was in the middle of sipping his coffee, spit it out in surprise, coughing violently.
Oh, did you come all the way to Alaska just to say that?
Of course not. I have something more important to discuss. I want us to get a divorce. Please, sign the papers.
Whoa. You're still holding a grudge over our argument about Mom? You need to stop with your delusions.
While staring at the divorce papers I handed him, my husband expressed disbelief, but there was a look of panic on his face, and he was breaking out in a cold sweat.
If you're saying I did it, then show me the evidence. The cookie is inside Mom's stomach. I bet nothing's left.
I thought you might say that, so I've gathered some evidence. I'm not so reckless as to fly over here for $500 one way without proof. I first showed him a fragment of a cookie in a clear bag. First, a piece of the cookie you sent. It's enough to detect poison. Even if poison was found in my mother-in-law's stomach, it doesn't necessarily mean the cookie was the cause, so we'll examine this.
But like I said before, there's a chance you put poison in, Susan.
I asked a police officer friend about the poison, and it's not something easily obtained. It's not something a layperson can get through normal channels. It would have to be from a specialized pharmacy.
That makes it even less likely to be me. I don't work for a pharmaceutical company, and I'm not a pharmacist.
My husband slammed his palm on the table to try and intimidate me and end the conversation, but I calmly continued. That's why I thought there might be an accomplice. You seem quite close with this girl, don't you? I presented the next piece of evidence, a photograph. It was a snapshot I had taken while tailing my husband. Seeing it, his face twisted in shock. In the photo was a woman clinging to my husband's arm in a very intimate manner, and my husband had his arm around her waist. Her name is Anne. She works at a nightclub. I took this photo in Anchorage.
Susan, aren't you ashamed of yourself for taking secret photos like this?
Aren't you ashamed of getting close to a nightclub girl while you have a wife? In response to my counterattack, my husband choked on his words and glared at me with resentment. But I would not be intimidated. Apparently, this girl named Anne is working at a nightclub while studying to become a pharmacist at a pharmaceutical university. Maybe she snuck out some poison from the university and talked you into sending me a cookie laced with it.
No, I've only met her at the nightclub. I had no idea she was studying to become a pharmacist or anything about the poison. This is pure speculation with no evidence.
The husband, stuttering and stammering, tried to keep up his excuses. I sighed and pulled out my mobile phone. You know, I think you value her more than me. Sorry, but I have proof. Turning the volume all the way up, I began to play a recorded call between my husband and me. The call should have been coming from his room, yet the faint sound of a shower running and a woman's voice calling, "John, come join me," could be heard in the background. Even for me, it was so faint that I wouldn't notice unless the volume was turned all the way up. Well, your claim of only ever meeting her at the nightclub is clearly a lie. If I dig deeper into the voice, I can find out who it belongs to.
Okay, I get it. I cheated. So what? It's your fault for not being as attractive as Anne. And my infidelity doesn't prove that I poisoned anyone.
The husband, now defiant, sprawled out without any sign of remorse. I decided to play him another call recording. Just before my mother-in-law collapsed, my husband could be clearly heard saying,
"Did Mom eat all the cookies I made? Make her throw up immediately."
"Can you explain why you said that if you knew nothing about it?" My husband bowed his head. Turning pale, he started to speak in a strained voice.
"Susan, how much do you know?"
"I'm guessing that you targeted my life because of the royalties from the novels I've written so far." At that, my husband took a sharp breath, presumably because I'd hit the nail on the head. Royalties are given to the copyright holder, and upon their death, the copyright can be inherited by their family. And copyright, the very thing that provides these royalties, can be inherited by the family once the holder passes away. So he must have been picturing himself living it up with his mistress on those royalties he'd inherit.
Please, forgive me. I did it because she told me to.
Oh, really? There's no sign of her having any dirt on you. Are you blaming others again?
I thought I hadn't left any evidence. Please, I'm begging you, don't divorce me.
Do you think I can go on living with a man who's trying to kill me? How would you feel in my position? Either way, I have no intention of forgiving you. I slammed the divorce papers on the table. Come on, let's get this over with.
You. Just because I'm begging doesn't mean you can get cocky.
Enraged, my husband grabbed me by the collar with both hands and tried to throw me to the ground. But then...
That's enough.
The police officers I'd called beforehand burst into the room. I'm glad I called them in advance. You never know what could happen when you're alone. In the end, my husband was arrested. I submitted all the evidence to the police, and right there, I made my husband write up the divorce papers. I had him cover all the hotel and flight expenses to and fro, and then I just breezily went home. The very next day, his mistress was arrested as an accomplice, and the two of them are now comfortably inside a jail cell together. Of course, I demanded a divorce settlement from the two of them, and once I receive it, everything will be wrapped up. Afterwards, I told my mother-in-law, who had been discharged from the hospital, the truth about what happened, and said our goodbyes. I moved to a new apartment, and then, a year later, when I used this experience as a plot for a mystery novel and published it, it surprisingly became a huge hit. For a novelist, every experience, good or bad, can be a source of inspiration.